What happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Best Day Ever Media. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. Today is episode number 25, and I'm joined with my co-host, Adam Martin. Hey, Adam, how are you doing?
Good morning, everybody. Excellent. Just got back from a 6K run with Mayday, so excited to cover the news today.
Nice. Well, we've got a handful of different stories to explore, and we're going to do a deep dive into the Klondike Papers, as well as, I assume, do you know what rat fucking is?
No.
Okay, so we'll explain what a rat fucker is as well later on in the episode, and I've got a handful of other stories for you guys, so let's jump into it. But first, we're going to hit our daily kind of update stories. So the first one here from True North, as we've been starting off for the last handful of days, recap day 16 of Emergencies Act hearing. Convoy organizer Tamara Litch opens up about life after arrest. So we saw some of the convoy organizers and the large personalities recently being or providing their testimony in regards to what went down with everything around the Freedom Trucker Convoy protest. You know, there was a couple little things of note. There was, I forget his last name, but Tom essentially, refused to give an interview to mainstream media. He said, "You guys have been lying for years. Why would I talk to you now?" Things of that nature. If you guys are interested, as always, links to this in the Telegram chat, which I just realized I forgot to post in advance. So I'll post it right after we're done this show. But just wanted to share that with you guys in case you wanted to do a deep dive. Next, let's jump into something else that there's no definitive proof around this, but I think that it's a conversation worth having. Maybe you guys have heard about the RSV virus. Maybe you've heard about different respiratory issues in young children right now. It's definitely something I'm hearing a lot about, just anecdotally speaking. But let's jump into this National Post article. Child hospitalizations are spiking. Did COVID lockdowns create immunity debt? Hospitals are reporting never-before-seen surges in children with severe viral infections that are pushing critical care beyond capacity. So I think a lot of parents of young children have probably already bumped up against this, whether personally or anecdotally speaking. And I think that this is a conversation at least worth exploring. I'm not saying that there absolutely is immunity debt here, but this is an interesting concept. And I suspect, again, this could be one of those unintended consequences from our previous policies around everything related to COVID-19, right? So the lockdowns in particular, as well as just like the concept of social isolation, kind of staying within your pod of your family and close friends or neighbors, this potentially has some weird consequences. A virus that infects and clogs a baby's airways is running rampant. An Ottawa hospital where parents have camped out with sick kids in emergency for up to 20 hours has made the gut punch decision to cancel some elective surgeries. In Montreal, doctors have linked the situation in their pediatric ERs to a horror film, not knowing what lurks around the corner. So this also ties into a bigger narrative. I shared, I think, with you maybe on a DM or my Instagram stories that we saw the top doctor here in Ontario discussing the idea of further masking mandates, right? The idea that going into this fall, because of what they believe to be a surge or a particularly virulent strain of flu, as well as what's going on with the RSV virus with young children. And then obviously COVID is still an epidemic. Here's a direct quote. Anyone with young children will quickly agree that our kids seem to be getting more sick and sick more often than in the past, said Rodney Russell, a professor of immunology and virology at Memorial University in Newfoundland. An unseasonably early crush of respiratory viral infections has once again raised the specter of an immunity debt. a concept described by some as an unintended boomerang effect of distancing, masking, and other COVID containment measures used to slow SARS-CoV-2 spread. So, for example, you've probably heard, people anecdotally or kind of jokingly say, like, when a kid gets hurt or cuts themselves, like, rub some dirt on it. And part of the idea behind that general, like, sort of perspective was that it's actually worthwhile to expose children to a certain amount of potentially harmful things, right? Again, back in my day, it wasn't unheard of for parents to essentially hold like chickenpox parties, where like if one kid got sick, like you weren't scared of having your kid play with that kid that had chickenpox, because the concept here was you want your kid to get young, because oftentimes in later adulthood, it can actually be a lot more detrimental. And like I can speak from personal experience, I got chickenpox in my first year of university, I think it was. And like it just kicked the shit out of me. Like it absolutely boot stomped me. And that was right around the time of SARS. So I ended up having to go to like Emerge. And they were isolating me because I went to university in Toronto and just like all kinds of random things. But when we're thinking about what's happened in the recent past, I think this is important to think about, because not only did lockdowns cause this, but I think we're seeing an entire generation of parents have different reactions to the idea of their children getting sick. And I think that we're seeing a different level of bubble parents to a certain extent, at least in certain niches of parenting. Continuing on with the article here, experts disagree about whether immunity debt is a real phenomenon or a convenient pseudoscience. But hospitals are reporting never before seen surges in children with severe viral infections that are causing historically long wait times and pushing critical care beyond capacity. So this article goes on just to explore kind of what's going on both with these viruses that are going after young children and their respiratory issues, as well as just kind of exploring what we're seeing right now in the hospital sphere of Ontario. Now, this is something we've discussed previously in the past as well, that there's a massive backlog of surgeries, right? A massive backlog of cancer screenings. There's a lot of these different unintended consequences circling around all of our, again, all of our prescriptions, or all of the essentially the different I'm drawing a blank here, but essentially all the different policies we had in regards to COVID-19 and the lockdowns and things of that nature. So again, we'll link this in the Telegram chat after the show. Now let's jump over to the National Post. We discussed this briefly before, but this is worth diving a little bit deeper into. Race-based student census to dismantle oppression, reviewed by Toronto School Board. This is the first TDSB census where census takers have openly expressed an aim to use their data to dismantle all forms of colonial and settler colonial violence. I'm kind of curious, what's the difference between colonial and settler colonial violence? But that's probably kind of one I don't actually want to open.
Yeah, you kind of had me there too. But yeah, I'd be interested in hearing that described here.
So, getting a little bit deeper into the article, the researchers note that they are active adherents of critical race theory. I think this is an important caveat or disclaimer here, because oftentimes we'll hear critical race theory isn't being taught in schools. It doesn't have implications in our school systems. But understand, the individuals implementing the census absolutely have it right in like the forefront of their thinking. So the researchers note that they are active adherents of critical race theory, the notion that racism is an ingrained aspect of society that only can be countered by race-centric policy that explicitly favors historically marginalized voices. An attached glossary says that the traditional Canadian belief in colorblind and multicultural policy is itself an upholder of white supremacy. The glossary also says that racism is not simple prejudice and can only exist when one group has power over another. Ergo, that racism against privileged groups doesn't exist. And so this is important to understand, because we're going to continue to see, in my opinion, more of our government policies, more of our government regulators, everything related to the public sphere is going to become infected by this sort of ideology, in my humble opinion. This is really just the tip of the spear. This isn't the end of the story. So I encourage you guys, if you're completely unfamiliar with critical race theory, do a little bit of research. I'm trying to think. New Discourses is a fantastic podcast around this, right? The creator of it, I'm drawing a blank right now, James. But essentially, James goes really deep. James Lindsay goes really deep into all these subject matters and really does an excellent job of highlighting this cultural Marxism that's really capturing, really taking over a lot of our post-secondary institutions have already capitulated to it. We're starting to see a lot more in the public sphere as well. And we're going to see it coming to a government agency near you, in my humble opinion, in the near future. So really encourage you guys, spend a little bit of time, get more familiar with this, because this idea, best case scenario, they've got good intentions, but there's going to be wild unintended consequences from these policies, right? So the concept is you cannot be racist against white people because they're in power. So this essentially means that you can almost rationalize any sort of action against white people because it can't be racist. And so again, this idea that multiculturalism in and of itself is like white supremacy. Well, so you can't be pro-white culture, and for all intents and purposes, white culture for these discussions usually means like European or Eurocentric beliefs and practices. You can't be multicultural, so you also can't embrace other culture. You end up in like a can't win situation here, which again, I adamantly just disagree with a lot of the fundamental notions of critical race theory and certainly the praxeology of it. So the putting it into practice, I think, has really dire consequences on a long enough time horizon. And I think that parents need to become educated and aware around these factors. I think it's very easy to want to turn a blind eye because maybe it's not happening right now, this second in your child's classroom. But understand, this is the trajectory we're currently on. The researchers add that they won't merely use the census data to highlight structures of oppression and pain, but will work from joy-centered frames to create alternative futures rooted in community joy and excellence. This honestly feels like a Babylon Bee article at certain points in time. At times, the document avoids the words Canada or Toronto, preferring instead the term land the border is situated upon. And now,
What?
land the board is situated upon. So again, like understand, even the concept of using the word Toronto or Canada by these individuals is perceived as white supremacist, right? Like this is racism rooted in any of the sort of names or institutions that we currently have. And you may think that like this is a nothing burger, but anyone that's been paying attention to politicians, like listen to what Liberal and NDP politicians usually start their stump speeches on. They'll first say, "We recognize that I'm currently on the unceded territory of insert Indigenous tribe here name," right? If you go to the Liberal Party's contact us form, it literally will say there, we recognize that Canada is on unceded territory, yada, yada, yada. Now, there's a lot of implications here, but the first thing that really frustrates me about this entire concept in general of this unceded territory is there's never been a people in the history of humanity that wanted to be conquered, right? That wanted to be taken over. And so, like, if you take this to its furthest logical conclusion, does that mean, like in Britain, they should be recognizing that we're on the unceded territory of the Celts? Sure, we eventually assimilated them, but they originally didn't want to be conquered by the Anglo-Saxons, right? Like, it's just such bizarre sort of framing. But again, it allows the individual to narrow in on a subset of facts and hold those as preeminent over all other perspectives, over all other sorts of data points available to us. Again, even these individual tribes that they often will cite as like, we're on the unceded territory of the Oneida. We're on the unceded territory of the Mohawk. We're on the unceded territory of, again, insert Indigenous tribe here name. But those tribes were never the first tribes either, right? There were tribes that preceded them. There were different cultural and societal structures that preceded them. And at what point in time, like, we're on the unceded territory of the wolves that were here before humans got to North America. Like, at what point in time we're on the unceded territory of the grass that was here before anyone ever came to North America? It's just a bizarre logical frame. Now, there's nothing wrong with teaching history openly and honestly, but when you choose to view it through this critical race theory lens, you start to really see weird perversions, in my opinion, to reality. Adam, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess I think like a lot of people when they first hear about this, you're thinking like, wow, this is I'm going to use a hilarious term here, but like a fringe minority of people that are kind of thinking these things and pushing these ideas, and so it kind of seems like it's inconsequential. But I think the real danger here is like the timing of where these types of ideas start. And so when these kids are young enough to be impressionable and they sort of lack the critical thinking element and logic of, a fully developed brain and somebody with real life experience, like you can certainly convince kids of these concepts. And then the challenge is like if they grow up with this, they're kind of indoctrinated with this, then they go through these other higher education facilities that are pushing similar ideas in college and university, and then they're out in the workplace, and I think that's where we see a lot of these issues today. Like that's why there's so many blue-haired people running around freaking out, and it's like I just it's all so dark to me that this can just be allowed to be pushed at an early age, and then people grow up with these thoughts instead of like actually critically thinking that, like, what you were just saying, right? Like obviously we're not the first people on this land, but so we're like the people before our people were not the first people on this land either, and like it's an unwinnable battle. And yeah, it's interesting to see the response too of just like people wanting to try and cater to everybody's emotions. Like it's cradle to grave nanny type state, and it's kind of, I think that's how we lose our society if it goes on long enough.
Well, and just to build upon a point, and I know the point you were making there, but I'll disagree with it to a certain extent. The idea that, like, maybe this is just kind of a fringe minority of individuals that have captured a handful of our institutions to be able to push forward CRT and its practices. However, understand that those individuals actually have a disproportionate amount of power. And the reason they have
Yeah.
a disproportionate amount of power is not only because they're often government funded and government sanctioned, essentially, right? But it's because they hold this like cancel culture sort of Damocles or whatever it is, the sword that hangs over you, right, at all times. They hold this cancel culture hammer over politicians, over journalists, over broadcasters, over large multinational media corporations. And so, because of that, a handful of people can spark massive outrage, right? Like, there's been anecdotal stories. I think, was it like Jeremy's Razors ended up canceling a sponsorship deal with the Daily Wire because of 2 tweets from individuals that essentially were not docs, right? So, just an anon, which I think both had under 100 followers. But it was that fear of cancel culture and a snowball occurring. Right now, like, I know you and I spend a lot of time in NFT culture, and there's been a lot of cancel culture over what a lot of people essentially believe to be an inappropriate joke made by Justin Rowland and by his writing partner Dan Harmon. And again, like, we'll leave that for a whole other discussion, but it's fascinating because a lot of people think that by implementing a lot of these critical race theory beliefs and practices, that they somehow are protecting marginalized communities. However, when you actually look at like the power structures, who's more likely to get canceled, right? Who's more likely to have consequences around this in the modern day, like in today's society? Not looking 50 years back, not looking 100 years back, but right now, here in the moment. And there's that that old saying that, look to who you can't criticize and you'll understand who has power over you. And right now, it's very difficult to take aim at critical race theory and not have social consequences. So again, that's something that I just want to highlight because I think it's very easy for people to want to dismiss this as like, oh, there's like 3 people with blue hair that are constantly reeing, and what's the big deal here? No, those people are like educating a generation of children. Those people are influencing the textbooks, the different lessons that get to go in front of those children, right? Like the same thing that we saw play out with woke universities. Not every university, in fact, no universities used to be woke. They literally used to be these citadels of education, of free speech, of exploring kind of things that go against the main ideology or orthodoxy of your times. And now it's the exact opposite, right? They're indoctrination centers that are simply focused on spitting out replicants that all think alike.
Yeah, I think one of the good things about these types of institutions is they're generally cannibalistic. Like the cancel culture and the like critical race theory proponents, like I almost guarantee that they will turn on themselves. And I think that does offer us a little bit of hope. And so I think between their cannibalistic nature and our ability to inform ourselves and hopefully help some other people see this for what it is, like I think there is hope though. Like I think there's a good path out of this.
Yeah, they certainly often fall to the like no true Scotsman fallacy, right? The constant desire to out others, right? And I guess the only pushback I'll give there is like the Nazis as well as the communists regularly fall to that. And yet we saw those empires last for significant periods of time in history, right? Like Joseph Stalin,
Yep.
the communist Russia that started off in the World War One is not the same communist Russia that we had in the 1980s. And yet it was still able to essentially um like cause so much uh it caused so much damage to all the citizens within its borders, right? And again, while there's power struggles within these elite groups and their preferred exact version of the ideology, I think these ideologies can last a lot longer than people suspect if people are too scared to speak out, right? There was that old concept in the Soviet Union of public lies and private truths. I think that a lot of us are living within that right now, where people will be like, yeah, I kind of agree. It's been kind of crazy the last 2 years, or like, yeah, I don't know really about the CRT stuff, but like they're only making me do, one hour or 1 day like workshop on it. So it's like not that big of a deal, really. And it's like, no, this is how it begins, right? But let's continue on with the article. Amid standard questions about whether students like school or feel accepted by classmates, they are also asked if teachers are using their preferred pronouns. Students are also provided a checklist of places they feel unsafe, such as prayer spaces, single gender washrooms, all gender washrooms, and school events. I can't help but feel like this is, at least to a certain extent, trying to lead the witness, right? This idea, like, and I feel like those prayer spaces in particular are going to be targeted. But again, in this weird time when they're trying to protect these marginalized individuals, understand that, like, it's not just Christians that want to use prayer spaces, right? Like, we've actually got a very large population of Muslims here in Canada that are very devout to their religion as well. It's bizarre, right? When you often look at these critical race theory proponents, because it's not really about trying to equalize the playing field. It's just about trying to correct mistakes or injustices that they view are more important than anything else, in my opinion. But anyways, if you guys want to read the entire report, because they took this down from their website for a period of time, maybe it's back up now, but there's definitely some shenanigans around even just uh like the moment this stuff becomes mainstream and public, we always see them backtrack. And that to me immediately shows that like you're uncomfortable with the truth behind these prescribed policies that you're trying to implement in our school system. Let's jump over now to Zero Hedge. We're going to be talking about Netherlands orders closure of 2 illegal Chinese police stations. This is something we've been speaking about previously, but it was worth highlighting that at least the Dutch are really trying to move forward on stopping this. So on November 2nd, Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wopke Hoekstra, posted on Twitter that the ministry was informed the Chinese ambassadors that the stations must close immediately. Now, we covered how there's at least 3 of these stations in Canada, and when kind of pushed on it, the Chinese government said they were really just service centers, right? Only filled with volunteers that were helping people get like Chinese driver's license if they couldn't make it back to China during the pandemic. However, we also had noted previously, Chinese media claimed that 230,000 fraud suspects were successfully persuaded to return to China by the overseas police between April 2021 and July 2022. So it's kind of weird because I've never went into a service center, Ontario, and been persuaded to turn myself in to another country. And certainly I haven't seen hundreds of thousands of Canadians experience that. Next, let's jump over to Zero Hedge. Pfizer, Audi, Mondelez join growing list of companies pausing ads on Twitter. So we're seeing a huge backlash against what's going on with Elon Musk taking over Twitter at this moment in time. I think that there's a much bigger story here, right? This isn't just a handful of individual companies deciding that Twitter's no longer in alignment with their advertising goals. This is all about cancel culture, right? This is about trying to punish Elon Musk for daring to try and turn Twitter back into a platform that's primarily focused on free speech. Now, I just kind of want to use this as an opportunity to rant because I see a lot of blue check marks right now going after Elon Musk and the idea of him expanding Twitter verification to an $8 a month fee. And they're just constantly, saying this is a money grab, it's inappropriate, that they'll drop Twitter if he does it. Good. I'm okay with that. I think that it actually makes a lot more sense for individuals simply to pay for the right to be verified to show, hey, whoever runs this account, we maybe done some basic research, determined they are who they claim to be. Plus, they care enough to pay in order to try and separate themselves from the individuals that are going to be anon or undoxed accounts. That actually seems like a very reasonable and intelligent business model, in my opinion. This really is no different, in my opinion, than other content platforms. And again, this maybe will be a bit of a reinterpretation for people that haven't spent time thinking about it, but it's really no different than paying for Netflix, than paying for Amazon in any other regards, right? I think that this idea that we've got these private or public companies that get to choose who's important enough to be verified, right? And it's such a game system. Like, I don't know how many DMs I've got from individuals saying they can get me verified. And like, you just need to get like, essentially the way it actually works for anyone that doesn't know is like, you'll see tiny accounts that are completely inactive be verified because like they're in junior sports. And the reason that they get verified is because they've got an agent, and that agent just has a backlist system, right? Or back channel system in order to have conversations to get them verified. But essentially, what you need is a handful of news articles. So if there aren't news articles about you in order to gain you the notoriety to get verified, then you simply like go and pay, Forbes India to write an article about you. You use that as justification for how the media's covered you and that you are a celebrity or a person of interest. And then you go and provide that to Twitter in order to get verified. I actually think that a lot of people are underestimating the importance of what Elon Musk is trying to do here with the $8 a month fee. I really hope that this goes on to be successful. I personally think that this could also become much more like Amazon Prime with Twitch. In regards to, you've got content creators on there, they're creating content, people have subscriptions to those individual content creators. I personally can envision a future where Twitter rolls out $8 a month fees, but then you get access to additional content made by individual content creators, and those content creators get compensated that way. Because right now, the primary mode of operating on social media when it comes to advertising dollars is simply, companies pay kind of blank checks to these large social media platforms that then choose to divvy it up based upon views or impressions or clicks or whatever kind of the primary driver is. On YouTube, you're often focused on your CPM, right? Your cost per 1,000 viewers. And like the niche of real estate investing, we usually saw it bounce between like $10 and $20 for our CPM. Now, I think that this is actually a move in the right direction for Twitter, and I look forward to it. But I do find it fascinating to see who the critics are of Elon Musk trying to move forward and make Twitter profitable. There's also the story right now that, the Red Wedding event is going to happen today at Twitter in regards to the purge of a lot of Twitter employees. There's been rumors that 75%, other people say 50% of Twitter employees will be let go. We've discussed it previously, but Twitter does have the highest ratio of employees to dollars of revenue. So it already didn't appear to be sustainable. So I don't think that this is something particularly unique or specific to Elon Musk. This is really just about trying to improve the platform in general. Anything on Twitter, Adam, before we keep rolling?
Yeah, one thing I didn't really get a chance to look into, but was reading, was that there was potential lawsuits already like being filed against Elon from the employees for initiating these layoffs so fast. But I really didn't get a chance to look into that and what that really would mean or what the implications would be. But yeah, I'm certainly. It's just fascinating to see the amount of companies and blue checks sort of mobilizing so quickly. And again, like it's the talk of the town. Like that's what CTV News was talking about all night last night. And it's just like, it's really interesting to watch this many people care at all about this to begin with. But I do agree that there's lots of potential use cases and future utility that could be added to Twitter that way. So this honestly could be a strategy too. Like if you wanted to clean house, this would be a great way to do it.
And like so far, we've seen him already meet with a lot of the bigger, more powerful censors on Twitter, like the ADL, and it seems like nothing satisfies them. So far, we've heard from Elon and Twitter that they haven't really changed anything, and yet we're already seeing these outcries. And so again, this appears to be very politically motivated, in my opinion, and I don't think it's well researched by the individuals that are pushing for it. But anyways, let's jump over to the Brownstone Institute. This is another update story. I just want to highlight, in the discussions about amnesty and people not knowing any better, the Brownstone Institute did a great job of just highlighting story after story after story after story of articles and studies and things of that nature that showed from day one or even before day one that the government actions in regards to the pandemic were inappropriate, that we should have known better, that they absolutely should have known better. And I really appreciate just individuals that spend the time to aggregate all this sort of data. So I really encourage you guys to go over. There must be like 100 articles here, it feels like. So spend some time if you want to go down that rabbit hole, or if you're trying to shut up that family member at American Thanksgiving, this would be a great article to send them.
Hey,
Now,
Matt, nice white pill from yesterday. I literally had my first friend. He's a paramedic and firefighter. I had my very first sort of friend come to me and say, hey, like, I actually thought that maybe you were going a little bit crazy during the pandemic and that maybe you were actually a conspiracy theorist and that maybe, you had lost touch a little with the severity of this thing, whatever. But I've been looking, and a lot of us have been talking at work and in our friend groups and in our work groups about all the data that's come out. And he's like, honestly, I have to just apologize to you. Like, I actually think that you were right, and I seriously respect your willingness to just stand by what you believed in throughout that whole time. And I thought that was very interesting. He's literally the first person to just openly say that and like own to the fact that he was like, I thought you were crazy. So I was like, dude, love you, and I'm really glad that you've decided to just at least do some more research, right? So I was very excited to hear that. So I'm glad to see more articles like this coming to the public attention, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely great to hear, Adam. And hopefully there'll be more anecdotal stories like that for all of us in the near future, of just the recognition that we're not crazy conspiracy theorists. But speaking of crazy conspiracies and whether they're correct or incorrect, let's go down a rabbit hole here. So we're going to be talking about what a rat fucker is. We're going to be talking about the Klondike Papers. We're going to be talking about political fixer out of Calgary. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm just going to share with you guys my interpretation of things. We're talking about essentially a leak of, or a doc of information that's 6,400 documents large, right? So I obviously have not spent the time to go through all of these. This originally broke back in mid-June of this year, but I haven't seen a lot of follow-up around it. And now we're just starting to see real coverage around at least one of the conspiracies in the Klondike Papers that appears to be essentially definitively true. Again, maybe we'll see that some things were doctored or things of that nature. But I guess I'm going to start this off with just saying, for individuals that think like their team is never in the wrong, things like this should always be a wake-up call, right? So I think these sort of shenanigans aren't exclusive to an individual political party. In fact, I'd be willing to bet my last dollar that every political party is capable of this sort of stuff when in the right circumstances. Again, small parties like the PPC, maybe you could exclude those, but also they probably don't even have the opportunity for temptation yet to go down these sort of paths. So it's hard to know until they're at that level. But let's start off here with the Western Standard. Inside the story of Operation Peacock, a failed murky plot to entrap Nenshi. So this is in regards to the mayor of Calgary. He was kind of a big figure in Canadian politics, right? I would even argue probably like bigger than most mayors. And so because of that, he was often like a political target. And like we often see with large cities in Alberta, they're usually going to be more like progressive or liberal than what you would naturally experience like in the rural parts of that province as well. So obviously, naturally, there's friction there. What's certain is a plot dubbed Operation Peacock to entrap former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi into taking illegal Russian money failed. I was told Nenshi was corrupt and certain councillors were corrupt and they'd accept bribes, so I developed a strategy, said political fixer David Wallace. Now, David Wallace is a very unique character in and of himself, so you guys should go down a rabbit hole before you take any of what he says at pure face value. Now, again, I do think that 99% of at least this specific story is likely true, or at least is more true than not. But David Wallace, again, kind of, he's been framed previously by people that had interactions with him as a con man, as kind of a bad actor, as a political fixer, as a rat fucker, or someone that like does rat fucking. I guess maybe that's the right term there. Again, I'll explain that term in a little bit here. It doesn't actually involve rats, in case you're explicitly thinking about things. But what is fascinating is, again, I don't think the concept of political fixers is unique to just one party. He's also been involved with, I'm forgetting right now the name of it, but it's this this peculiar church. Maybe that's the best way to frame it. Often comparisons are made between this church and Scientology because they often go after like excommunicated members and try and destroy their lives if they dare to speak out against that religious institution. Continuing on with the article here, though, I was told all these people were accepting bribes and destroying the city of Calgary. Wallace's efforts to first uncover corruption on Nenshi, followed by a plan to lure him in by insinuating that copious Russian cash was available, went nowhere. So, again, when it comes to these sort of like attempt to entrap people, I think that we need to err on the side of precaution in regards to like got you moments about the people that were entrapped, right? It's very obvious that a person like David Wallace goes into this interaction with a very preconceived notion and goal set in mind, right? Like get the Calgary mayor. Now, there was no evidence that the Calgary mayor behaved wrongly at any point in time, at least in regards to this entire affair. Further on in the article, it highlights Hallman, who I believe was one of the individuals that hired him. In regards to trying to go after the Calgary mayor, quoted, "I don't think he's cleansing his conscience," said Hallman in regards to David. "David is a liar. I think that's what's in the public record demonstrably proves he's a liar. There may be grains of truth to some things he says, but by and large, I don't think he's a credible person or a credible source. He asked if I thought there was foreign interference in Ontario politics. He knew about me because at the time," and now this is Hallman said Wallace reached out to him by 2017. He knew about me because at the time, if you Googled me, all you would find was a report I worked on a former MP and senator that was intended to expose the Tides Foundation and flow of money from the United States into Canadian anti-pipeline activities. He reached out trying to hook me on that. Then he just wanted to stay in touch. So honest, there's so much here that unless we did a full special episode deep dive, and I'm just not sure that I've got it in my heart of hearts to do this, would you guys let us know in the comments if you want to see us go deep into either Project Peacock or the Klondike Papers or anything else like that. But I want to give you guys just kind of a high level breakdown of all this stuff. So let's first discuss what rat fucker or rat fucking is. So rat fucking is an American slang term for political sabotage or dirty tricks, particularly pertaining to elections. It was brought to public attention by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein in the book, which chronicled the investigative reporting of the Watergate affair, All the President's Men. So, again, this concept's been around for a while. It's been around before this term was ever used as well, right? The idea of going after and trying to persecute or entrap your political opponents or enemies. How this all really got on my radar was Canada Land did a podcast episode about this, and I encourage you guys to go check it out, and I'll pull that up in a second. I think I've got that as a separate tab here. But let's go into Canada Land's article here. Calgary Conservatives plotted to entrap and oust Mayor Nenshi and big store con scheme. So it was to set up an area in which these supposed corrupt politicians were put in a compromising position on tape where they were accepting favors in exchange for acting as cover to wash these funds. David Wallace, the aforementioned fixture, tells Canada Land in the new investigative series Rat Fucker. So the first episode of this podcast recently came out. It's about 37 minutes. If you guys are interested, it's a well-produced podcast. I encourage you guys go check it out, sink your teeth into it. Or again, you can get your hands on the Klondike Papers and go through the 6,400 documents yourself. But I hope we see more of this. Like, I hope we see more of these sort of political fixers being called out. Now, this is David Wallace. I can't help but think that he's maybe trying to get in front of a narrative here, right? Like, did reporters come knocking on his door and he realized that it would be better for his political career to try and get out in front of this and come off as a whistleblower? I haven't seen really a breakdown or explanation of why he had this change of heart and why he's now trying to, make Canadian politics more honest. So again, I think that anything that he says at this point in time should be treated with a certain level of scrutiny. But let's jump over now to Press Progress and their kind of expose on the Klondike Papers. So we've reviewed 6,400 pages of documents called the Klondike Papers. Here's what we know and don't know. The Klondike Papers do not reveal a vast conspiracy or explain everything, but they do shine a light on some concerning matters of public interest. And so I know when this originally broke, some journalists, some political pundits framed this essentially as a leftist QAnon. right? As in, again, these were leftists, progressives that were prone to beliefs of conspiracy theories and immediately jumping on the bandwagon. Now, there was a lot of misinformation or people jumping to conclusions around this. Again, at least aspects of the Klondike Papers can be verified based upon other sources of information as well and by other participants in it. So I don't think you can just throw away this entire narrative. But I think that this concept that they do not reveal a vast conspiracy or explain everything, but they do shine a light on concerning matters of public interest. That is very accurate in my opinion. I think this is something that should be getting more attention. And we should be investigating a lot more political fixers, right? Both on the conservative, the liberal, the NDP sphere of things. I'd love to understand and get more investigative journalism on all of this stuff. So obviously, you can see when Klondike Papers originally broke, they essentially were non-existent until this year, and then a massive jump and spike in regards to people trying to review it. There's lots of good sources here. The Klondike Papers also kind of call into question some Doug Ford stuff, so that'll be interesting to see if we really get to the bottom of that. But they did take on a life of their own, as is noted here in this article, where essentially, other conspiracies and other kind of far-fetched beliefs were just layered on or attached to this, because I think a lot of people just knew that individuals probably weren't going to spend a lot of time on this. And so originally, when Klondike Papers started to really gain traction, people were like, well, this proves that the Freedom Trucker Convoy is completely made up and da-da-da-da, or not made up, but is a political invention of the right and extremists and Russians and things of that nature, because the Klondike Papers reference Russians. But first things first, let's get very clear here. None of the documents in the Klondike Papers go past 2021. So the idea that this somehow directly relates to the Freedom Trucker Convoy protest seems to have no bearing whatsoever. But again, there should be a lot of questions being asked here, and I don't think that we've seen this covered really at the federal level in politics. There's also questions of whether Patrick Brown, the mayor of Mississauga, if he's involved with these Klondike Papers. It seems like this political fixer, David Wallace, he's got connections to a lot of different individuals and organizations, and a lot of them right-leaning. So, he kind of acted as a private investigator and stumbled into this and started really leaning into it. He claims that by speaking out, this is costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, I think I saw in one of the quotes. So again, I'm a little suspect that an individual that essentially would kind of do anything for money, all of a sudden now would give up all that money just to be a good person. But I don't know if we'll ever get to the bottom of it, but just want to highlight a few other things. There is a Twitter account called the Klondike Papers that's often showcasing different things and news articles related to it. Again, I think you need to be really careful with taking any one individual source. I did want to call out this episode of Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson, where he brings on Justin Ling. And now, again, I also don't think that Justin Ling is a perfect journalist either, right? He's an individual I often take aim at because of his narrative around the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters. He was the journalist in the Toronto Star that came out and said that from an anonymous police source that loaded shotguns were taken from the Ottawa protest. To the best of all publicly made available information, there is no proof that that is the case. And yet that was often cited by politicians on the Liberal and NDP side of the aisle to demonize and even to justify the Emergencies Act. So again, I think that with all this stuff, it needs to be taken with a grain of salt. I think Justin Ling does a pretty unbiased take here, though, in this interview. And I'd strongly encourage those of you that are interested in kind of going down this rabbit hole to listen to this podcast, listen to the Canadaland Ratfucker series. Again, only episode 1 is out so far. But I think when thinking about the different sources you take information from, I think you also always have to put into context their individual biases. And so one of the reasons that I'm more prone to listen to Justin Ling on this is I think it would be in alignment with his political biases to want to make a bigger deal of this than what it is. And the fact that he seems to come with a very balanced approach on it, that yep, there's definitely shenanigans afoot, but no, this doesn't have anything to do with the Freedom Convoy protesters. And he makes some great points about how previously some conspiracies, I think, have really caused massive doubt when it comes to investigative journalists, right? One of the ones that he references here that I constantly think of is the Steele dossier. and the concept that there was this videotape of prostitutes peeing on a bed that Obama stayed in at a Trump hotel, and Trump paid them and all this. And like, it turns out to be completely unfounded. There's no evidence whatsoever that was true. And yet a lot of mainstream journalists ran with it. So I guess one thing I kind of want to give props to is that the majority of mainstream journalists, either in Canada, are just oblivious to this, or they're actually trying to be nonpartisan in exploring these and taking their time to get to the bottom of it. I am kind of surprised that it hasn't been a bigger deal in general. Maybe it's just because it doesn't tie in any active politicians strongly into this conspiracy. Again, understand the word conspiracy doesn't mean that it's like fake, right? Like, a conspiracy is literally just a group of people conspiring to try and execute something. So like, the term conspiracy here is reasonable, and that's not me trying to belittle the Klondike Papers whatsoever. It was literally a conspiracy by individuals to try and take down the mayor of Calgary at the time. Dean Blundell, an individual I'm almost never going to agree with, he definitely took a more extreme view of this. Now, he's came out after the fact and kind of apologized and corrected the record. I think that he's far more prone to jump to conclusions on things like this. But again, I want to include his take on it so that you guys can make for yourself of the different points of views and come to your own conclusion. So again, we'll share all these links, including the episodes of the podcast that I've referenced already, in the Telegram chat. So I encourage you guys to go check it out. But weird, to say the least. So I guess my big question for you, Adam, had you heard anything about this?
No, honestly, I don't recall ever hearing the term Klondike Papers, and yeah, I really hadn't heard much about that. And I actually just asked the viewers too, and it sounds like nobody has heard of this, Matt.
Yeah, so interesting. I look forward to listening to the entire Rat Fucker series, not only just because I like using the word rat fucker, but because, again, I hope they will shine some light on it and we can get to the bottom at least of some of the stories and some of the conspiracies included in the Klondike Papers. But anyways, we'll keep rolling. I'm going to jump over. This is technically only our third story of the day, but we'll go through it quickly here. From the Mises Institute, how the Soviets fixed inflation but ruined the economy. And I thought this was a really interesting take by Ryan McMacken, because, like, I understood to a certain extent how the Soviet economy worked, but I'd never thought about how supply chain shortages and good shortages could essentially hide inflation for extended periods of time through essentially like a saved or a forced savings mechanism. And personally, I don't think a lot of people have ever really dwelt on this idea. So price inflation and the resulting business cycles are monetary phenomenon. And without increases in the money supply, i.e. monetary inflation, there is no price inflation. If there were a very simple place, or if the world were a very simple place, we would see the relationship clearly displayed. When the money supply increased, we would also see a general increase in prices soon thereafter. The world, however, is not a very simple place, and an economy can include countless factors and can mask, delay, and otherwise obscure the connection between monetary inflation and price inflation. Further on in the article, he goes on to explain one particularly interesting case of how governments can hide price inflation for decades is the Soviet Union. Under the Soviet regime, the money supply, denominated in unbacked fiat money, of course, was continually expanded to increase wages and create the impression of prosperity. This would have led to price inflation quickly, but for the shortage economy and the demand-killing government policies endured by the average Soviet citizen. As is so often the case, the regime was able to cover up the effects of inflation for a time, but the policies ultimately proved to be disastrous. And so, again, this is an interesting exploration of like, why didn't the Soviet economy originally collapse like day one, right? Because of their monetary inflation. I think that you can draw certain parallels. It's not a perfect apples to apples comparison here, but certain parallels can be drawn to our modern day economies and why central bankers don't immediately have to pay the consequences of monetary inflation, of quantitative easing, of things of those like um banking policies, why those don't immediately drive to inflation that's experienced by the average citizen. Further on, he highlights this is propaganda, of course. So, actually, let me read this quote here first. In the Soviet Union, there's not and cannot be any inflation. And so, this was Vasily Garbuzov's quote. The possibility of inflation is fully precluded by the very system of planned socialist economy. In our country, both wholesale and retail prices are established by the government, and therefore the purchasing power of the ruble is controlled on a planned basis. The stability of Soviet currency is guaranteed by the monopoly of currency and the monopoly of foreign trade, which is one of the most important advantages of the socialist economic system. And the reason I think it's important to highlight this right now is as we see greed inflation become such a big talking point in Canadian politics, is there's the risk that we're going to try and control significant aspects of our economy as well. This is propaganda, of course, but in a sense, Garbazov was right. A socialist state really could moderate the price effects of monetary inflation by throttling back the standard of living and consumption options whenever it seemed prices were rising. Another quote I want to share here with you guys from Roger Clark was the reason for excess supply of money is that the state has consistently overpaid the population in the form of wages, pensions, stipends, etc., which exceed production plus net imports and minus net exports of consumer goods at the currently ruling retail prices fixed by the state. While there was indeed while there has indeed been a steady rise in retail prices despite the stability of the official index, this has been very far from sufficient to equalize the real effect demand of the population with the available supply of goods. In other words, the state generates excessive purchasing power in the hands of the population. And in an unhampered economy, wages are closely tied to the productivity of workers, so wages would not grow out of proportion to the amount of goods and services available in the economy. In a socialist economy, however, the price of labor, wages, were arbitrarily set like all other prices. And again, this is a big factor here for us in Canada because I'm so nervous that we're going to see price fixing constantly supported and promoted by at least the NDP, if not actually spilling over to the federal Liberal Party as well. So again, great article. There's a lot of nuance here. I encourage you guys to spend some time and check out. But just wanted to highlight one more point here in regards to hyperinflation and how and why it set in Soviet Union. By the late 1980s, the Soviet economy was already primed for price inflation, yet repressed inflation continued to be a sizable factor, pushing down official inflation rates until the mid 1980s. With the advent of perestroika, and some limited pro-market reforms, Soviet citizens were increasingly able to purchase more goods and import more goods. Decades of forced savings led to runaway inflation as shortages became less acute in many cases. That monetary overhang came out of savings accounts and drove price inflation to disastrous heights. So again, one of the narratives that you probably heard during the start of the pandemic was Canadians and North Americans were saving more money than they had previously. Now, again, that's not necessarily a bad personal financial decision, but the reason why an individual was saving is an important reason. And one of the things we've seen right now as we presumably go into a recession, right, while we go into a high inflationary environment, is we're hearing a lot of reporting that consumers aren't behaving in a manner that normally you would expect of a recession. They're not trying to save, and it seems like they're continuing to spend. And so I think this raises an interesting thought to at least, dwell on for a little bit or think about on your free time is what's that forced savings an aspect of consumers becoming more responsible, or was it kind of like monetary overhang for savings because there were some shortages, right, in different aspects of the economy, whether you're thinking about buying that big new fancy truck, whether you just want to load up on toilet paper. We definitely saw different aspects of the economy and niches of consumables being harder to get a hold of, right? Certainly travel, right, and anything related to tourism, again, dropped dramatically, not necessarily because of consumer preferences, but because of government policies and the implications there behind those government policies. Adam, any thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there was massive changes in consumer behavior and in everything, right? Automotive, even just thinking about like stuff that goes in your house, right? Like lumber was very expensive. It was very difficult to get fixtures and appliances and things like that. So, like, I don't. Yeah, it's weird to measure that because like people just couldn't spend on under that under those type of economic conditions because the supply just wasn't there. So it is interesting to look at that. But yeah, I can't say that I really want to find myself in the place that Russia or USSR did when perestroika came through, right? Like obviously all the money flowed to the top and there was a very few people that got to actually benefit from that while everybody else suffered.
Mm-hmm. And like, obviously, I'm not prescribing this as a solution to
Yeah.
our problems, but highlighting that we could actually be running in parallel to a
Yeah.
certain extent, right? Again, we saw absolutely the rich got richer during the pandemic and a lot of the policies around the pandemic. A socialist guide to lowering price inflation. The Soviet experience provides an example of how expanding the monetary supply forces a choice. In response, an inflationist regime can commit to reining in monetary inflation to tackle rising prices, or a regime can solve an inflation problem by destroying demand via price controls and shortages. The latter choice requires lowering the standard of living and gradually reducing consumer prices again and again. Yet, even this draconian option fails to prevent hyperinflation in the end, particularly if you find yourself opening up to foreign markets, right? But one thing I want to highlight here is we're constantly hearing this preaching of austerity, often couched or hidden in the idea of climate crisis. And so again, there's constantly an argument that we essentially have to lower our standard of living here because of the climate crisis. Well, that also is actually a convenient narrative for any government that has inflationary policies. And it would just so happen that every single government in the Western world, it turns out I'm not aware of a single government in the world that doesn't have inflationary monetary policies, right? That isn't operating on a fiat standard. So that is just kind of an interesting perspective here, right? You could lower the cost of living, or not lower the cost of living, lower the quality of life, right? Lower consumer choices and frame it as being related to climate change while also hiding a lot of the monetary impropriety that your regime is enacting on its citizens. And so I think that this could really delay the feedback loop in regards to hyperinflation, and something that I hadn't thought through this lens before, and I suspect a lot of people haven't. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Then finally, I'm not even going to really spend time on this, but just wanted to highlight here. Great article from Fee Stories, What the American Founders Meant by Equality. So again, sometimes, more than sometimes, we see individuals trying to reframe or redefine language in order to fit their narrative conveniently. And I just wanted to highlight, as is done here in this Fee Stories article, that no, like the founding fathers, when they talked about all men being equal, they were not trying to say equality of outcome, right? They were trying to say that essentially you shouldn't be mistreated because of your individual characteristics. However, you're still up to operate within a meritocracy, right? Like the cream's allowed to still rise to the top in the form of democracy or Republican democracy that they expected the U.S. to be governed by. And I see a lot of people right now bastardizing the language around the founding fathers and what they'd originally intended. And as is explored here in this Fee Stories article, they highlight the fact that, like, no, these individuals were referring to equality and all men being equal in the sense that you would have seen John Locke refer to it, right? Not in the way that you would see like cultural Marxists referred to equality. So again, want to share that. We kind of went long on the Ratfucker story, so I'm just going to keep rolling here, but I appreciate you guys watching this video. If you enjoyed what we're doing here on Best Day Media, smash the like button, hit subscribe. Definitely subscribe to our Substack where we post articles every week, as well as hit us up and join the Telegram chat where I'm going to share all these show notes right after this show.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Matt. That was definitely an engaging set of news stories today, and I'm looking forward to following up and looking more into those Klondike papers and doing a bit more research for myself.
Yeah, me as well. And again, who knows? Maybe we'll end up doing a deep dive if we find more than meets the eye when it comes to it. But there's a lot there to unpack as well. So I think it could take a while to digest. But yeah, appreciate that, guys. As we've kind of mentioned earlier on in the week, Adam's in the process of moving. I'm in the process of trying to wrap up this documentary about. I finally settled at least on how many false narratives I'm disproving in it. So we're at 14 false narratives. So that's the number I'm rolling with. Again, they're not all the false narratives, but I think they're the most important false narratives to be discredited when it comes to the Freedom Trucker Convoy protest. I'm hoping end of day tomorrow, I'll have that video out. I've just got a few voiceovers, some transition edits, and I need to figure out how to end it because if I was to try and cover everything, it would just be like hours, where I'm trying to keep it under an hour 15. Because I think that that's a reasonable amount of time to expect a person to watch and listen to it. So not sure how I'm going to end it. There might end up having to be a whole part 2 to it. But yeah, anyways, really looking forward to sharing that with you guys. We'll let you know on Best Day Media when it's ready. Anything else, Adam, you wanted to share?
No, that's good. perhaps one way to end that is by just simply flashing the definition of a conspiracy, and maybe just putting a little bit of bedrock under that actual term, right? Like, this is just people conspiring to actually do something, right? It's not crazy or wacko if it all makes sense. So yeah, I'm really excited to see that, Matt. And again, just my one little anecdotal story of my first friend or first close person in my life to actually admit that they thought I was crazy, and have since done some research and found out that perhaps things weren't what they thought. I think that's for me anyways, that's a torch, right? That's a torch, a light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm excited if even one person could have been convinced by us sharing our thoughts and staying true to our values, then I think that means I at least feel like I did my job. So I'm happy about that.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys. We're going to roll into the weekend. I hope you have the best weekend ever. We'll be back Monday, and we'll have more news to share with you guys then. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting